You know who doesn't care about Cy Ray? Potential jurors if Brian Kohberger is approved for a trial after appeal. That's who. They're going to hear one story from the prosecution, one story from the defense, and decide which one makes the most sense. The easiest to believe story usually has the advantage. And in this video, you'll hear the simple story that Cy Ray may have helped hand to the prosecution, followed by the question, what's the defense's equally simple story? Imagine you're juror number 7. It's the first day of trial and you've just heard the term Idaho4 for the first time. You know you're going to hear days, maybe even weeks, of hard to understand technical and physical evidence. But there isn't a pause button or a phone a friend lifeline like in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You can't call your favorite Idaho4 creator and ask why there's been arguing about the surviving roommates for years. Whatever conclusion you reach has to come from what you hear inside that courtroom. By the end of the day, you've listened to hours of testimony, your notebook is full, and you're ready to go home. That's who this case has to persuade. So let's listen to the kind of story the prosecution could tell using evidence that's already in the record, including what we've learned from Cy Ray's recent expert opinion and subsequent commentary. I'm not asking you to believe the story. I'm asking you to listen to it the way that juror number 7 would. Here's a simple story, but pay close attention how the evidence only gets stronger with each succeeding step. Brian Kohberger studied criminals at the PhD level. He knew enough about criminal investigations to turn his phone off before driving towards Moscow that evening. That means we can't tell exactly what road he took getting there, but here's one that generally avoids cameras and highways. What we do know is that the knife sheath left behind contained DNA that even the defense does not dispute belonged to Mr. Kohberger. We have video evidence that Mr. Kohberger left the crime scene around 4:20 that morning with his phone still off. But we believe that he headed south through Blaine, again to avoid major highways. That 28-minute drive reaches Thornhill Road at almost exactly 4:48. 4:48. His phone reconnects to the network. Both the defense and prosecution agree that's when and where the phone comes back on. But the map geography limits how the phone could have possibly got there to a couple of routes, with the most logical being the route south through Moscow. From Thornhill Road, going back to Pullman on the highway would have also been easier, but Mr. Kohberger chose to take a more difficult route home despite it being 5 a.m. One possible explanation is that Mr. Kohberger turned his phone back on because he needed navigation for the rest of the drive while continuing to avoid the highways. From Thornhill Road to the Bishop and Johnson Road intersection entering Pullman is about a 36-minute drive. That puts Mr. Kohberger there at approximately 5:25. And at about 5:25, a white Elantra is seen passing through that intersection. That, or something similar, is the prosecution's basic story. Whether every piece of it survives trial isn't really the discussion I'm trying to have. What stood out to me is how naturally one event leads to the next. You don't have to stop every few minutes to learn a new concept to remember, or something that happened 3 years ago, or some controversy about the evidence. It's a story that can be heard once and remembered, even if there are specific problems pointed out with some of the details. During Cy Ray's interview, most of the panel discussion centered on the 2 a.m. tower pings, which direction the vehicle was facing, and whether it turned left or right. That's not the most interesting part to me. The more interesting part is that Cy Ray confirmed both the approximate time and location of the 4:48 phone connection. Why does that tower ping matter more than the 2 a.m. tower pings? Because it gives the prosecution a confirmed anchor point for their story. Once you've anchored the phone at Thornhill Road at 4:48, you can start asking what fits naturally before that point and what fits naturally after it. The surveillance video near the King Road residence at approximately 4:20 a.m. suddenly lines up with a drive that reaches Thornhill Road 28 minutes later. Is that proof that Mr. Kohberger committed the crime? No. Same car? Let the jury decide. But it is a corroboration. Then look in the other direction. From Thornhill Road to the Bishop and Johnson Road intersection is about a 36-minute drive. that places a white Elantra at that intersection almost exactly when one is captured on surveillance video. Again, that's not proof by itself, but it is another corroboration. One fact doesn't have to prove everything. It just needs to fit naturally with the facts around it, and that tower ping makes it easy to do so. Now let's switch sides. If you're defending Mr. Kohberger, what's your story? I don't mean what evidence you disagree with. I mean the story. The defense doesn't just have to attack the prosecution's story. They have to replace it. And whatever replaces it has to be easier for juror number 7 to believe than the story they just heard from the prosecution. That's the challenge. One possible defense story is Mr. Kohberger really was out driving by himself that morning, just as his alibi suggested, and that an extraordinary series of coincidences placed his DNA on a knife sheath, his car on surveillance video, and his phone on a route that happened to line up with the state's timeline. Maybe that's the story. Maybe it isn't. But if Mr. Kohberger is innocent, the defense eventually has to explain why investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and the courts all ended up believing that they had the right man. That's a much harder story to tell than simply pointing out problems with individual pieces of evidence. And that's where I think so much of the discussion has gone off the rails. I've watched creators and commenters spend hours arguing about psi-ray or individual disputes about evidence, to the point the entire discussion has become about that single point instead of the overall story. Whether psi-ray is right, wrong, paid, a spy, everything under the sun to discredit him has had points largely directed towards those who already don't believe him. Don't get me wrong, those are interesting discussions, but they don't answer the question Juror 7 is eventually going to ask. So what do you think happened, defense? Because that's the question waiting for juror number 7, just before all 12 of them walk into the jury deliberation room. If the prosecution's story isn't true, what story should replace it? And that's the discussion I'd like to see creators and true crime followers start to have. Forget what you think about psi-ray for a minute, and whether you agree with every piece of the prosecution's timeline. If you were sitting at the defense table, what story would you tell that juror number 7 could hear once, carry into the deliberation room, and repeat to the other 11 jurors? Because if psi-ray's work accomplished anything, I think it's showing just how powerful a simple story can be, even with some problems of individual details. And in this case, so far, the story has been much more powerful for the prosecution. If you like my videos and how I present the information, please subscribe and like the video.